Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278.
The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, present a podcast for divorced and separated Catholics.
Hello, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. This is Ann DeSantis, the director, and this is our podcast series on 10 steps for healing for divorced Catholics. And joined with me is the president of the foundation, Mickey Kelly. I want to welcome him. Mickey, thanks so much for joining us on this podcast.
Always a pleasure to be here, Ann.
Thank you so much. Now, this is a whole 10-part series, so I'm going to read through the 10 steps of healing. Now, don't worry, you don't need to get a pen and paper out or your computer or laptop or anything like that, because there's going to be a podcast for each step. So tonight is step 3, and step 3 is stepping back from too many commitments to be with family, and that's geared for Catholics and Catholics who are either separated, divorced, or annulled, and finding that healing, the steps for healing. So step number 1 is acceptance of your situation with God's help. 2 is finding the proper help and resources where needed. 3, which would be tonight, stepping back from too many commitments to be with family. 4 is seeking God's help through prayer and sacrifice. 5 is developing your faith in greater ways. 6 is prayer. 7 is sharing your story with trusted friends to find guidance and fellowship. 8 is if you're not annulled, find out more. 9 is develop healthy new friendships with those who have faith. And 10, get involved in ministry in order to help others. So I just want to give all of you what you are to be looking forward to for the future when we talk about all these other steps. But let's go right into step number 3, and that is stepping back from too many commitments to be with family. Let's just kind of like talk about the situation. You know, if you're listening to this podcast and you're newly separated or newly divorced or annulled, let's face it, your life is changing. You're not living in the same house with your former spouse. Maybe you're in a different neighborhood. Maybe you're in a different church community. Your kids are growing. They're involved in activities. And things can get crazy. You know, things can get crazy with your own life and what's going on and just the whole balance of it. But our advice to you on this podcast is just to step back for a while and just to be with your family, to be close to them, to support them, and also to support yourself in everything that you're going through. Now, I also want to mention for you who are listening, if it's the first time that you've ever been on this podcast, is that Mickey and I are both adult children of divorce. Mickey's parents divorced when I believe he was around 10 years old. My parents divorced when I was 7. So I do recall I was the oldest of 4 at the time, and my mom remarried and had another child. So I'm actually the oldest of 5. But how she had to step back, how my parents had to step back to just go through that situation and to find healing through just, coping, right? Coping. So let me turn it over to you, Mickey. Maybe you can share with us, if you can go back in your own memory, What was it like in terms of your mom and your dad and what they had to do as they were going through that process?
Well, and I think first of all, I think you really touched on some very important points, especially, and I think I talked about it in our previous episodes, and just for the sake of knowing, just feel free to scroll back, and I know we'll be reminding people about this. So, if you have not really kept up with this series, don't panic. I mean, the beautiful thing about YouTube is that you can all like we have a channel, we have a playlist, so you just always can go back, from the first video of this series and try to catch up. But yeah, so my story is in 2000. My parents actually got divorced, and it was very painful too. And of course, I didn't really understand. I didn't really comprehend what the whole thing was. But as someone as the youngest of four, actually, of course, I know there's like a gap between, like a comprehension gap between you and your oldest sibling who happens to be almost 10 years older than you. You don't really understand it, but the effect is more like on your older siblings because they can understand things. And honestly, it was something that if forever changed my life. If or something like that, like I could have chose to do things such as get involved in their own crowds, gangs, or whatever, but something inside me just just told me to keep the faith. And it did, and I did.
Excuse me. Uh, First of all, I want to just thank you and commend you for sharing with us because you've been very open during these podcasts about what you've been through and what your family went through too. It's a whole family situation, isn't it? It's not just the parents, it affects everybody, doesn't it? And I did find some wisdom that I wanted to share with all of you on this whole topic of stepping back, taking your time to rest. It's an exhausting thing, I think, isn't it? When you're going through some kind of a challenge, a crisis, a trauma sometimes. For some people, divorce and separation is a trauma. I don't think it is for everyone to the extent that it is for other people, meaning that for some people, it really is an almost an abusive situation, right? That can happen. It does happen. And for them, it's a trauma. And there's for other people that maybe the relationship with the spouse isn't, horrible, meaning that you can still talk to them and you can still arrange visiting times for the kids and things like that. But either way, it is a challenge. Now, I found some wisdom here from our good friend Rose Sweet. Now, Rose is a Catholic author and speaker, and she's also an expert in terms of healing when it comes to Catholics affected by divorce. She herself has been a divorced and an old, and she has a website that's called CatholicsDivorce.com. And what she says here, it says, how do I help my kids? And she says, by helping yourself first. It's smart, not selfish. Imagine you all flew out of a car crash. You can't crawl over and help the kids when you're rapidly losing blood yourself. You'll last longer and be in a better position to help more family members if you first tie in a tourniquet around your own gaping wound. Airline stewardesses also tell you that. In the event of an emergency, you must put the oxygen mask on yourself first, not your child. Why? If you pass out, you'll no longer be able to help your baby. After divorce, we want to help you learn to let go of many things. Slow down, take rest, get help, pray more, talk things out, solve problems, find solutions, create a new life, and learn to forgive. These are invaluable life lessons that you can pass along to your children only after you learn them first. The most important lesson you must learn and pass on is the priority of God in every area of your life, the continual surrender of your will to His, and the desire to seek Him evermore. It goes on to say, keep listening to your kids. They will each experience divorce differently. Don't overindulge them or ease up in normal routine or discipline. Don't overschedule or overstimulate them. Read good Catholic parenting books. It says try our expert and author Dr. Ray Guarendi. Get counseling, pray, and play. I think these are excellent points of advice, Mickey. What do you think?
Yeah, truthfully, and I honestly thought that there were some very good points, and even Rose touched on some of them, because the first thing that we really, it can be traumatizing too, depending on the circumstances of the divorce. Like the spouse could have broken up because of like marital issues, or well, any divorce, there is some sort of marital issue, and it can be infidelity, finances, constant argument, even like environments where things are a teeny bit unsafe, for the kids and of course for the spouse. And honestly, I think one of the first things we really have, like one of the first things, as it was pointed out, is that we have to understand that God is in control no matter what it is, and something can come out of it, no question about it. And some of the important things that I can really take away from it is that, there you do have find a support system is one of the most crucial things in an event of a divorce, whether it be to reach out to a close family relative or even a friend and let them know what is going on. And every now and again, like you always have to check in with them, like, how's everything going?
That is a great point. We need to care about our friends, and we need to care about people who are going through a challenge. And you might be listening to this podcast and maybe you're not getting divorced, and maybe you're not separated or annulled, and maybe you're just listening because you're curious. But Mickey made a really good point that, we all have a responsibility to care about one another and to check on them. And so I think that's an excellent point of reference for all of us. It's not just good for divorce either, is it? I mean, it's not just something for people who are divorced or separated. Checking on your friends and seeing how they're doing is an important aspect of being a good person and a good Catholic, a good Christian. But I think when it comes to divorce and this whole topic of what our topic is tonight, which is stepping back and why it's good to step back. Now, maybe you're in a career where, you can't step back too far because you got to work and you have to move ahead with what you're doing with your job so that you can support your kids, your family. That's not what we're talking about, I don't think. I think what we're talking about is that, the primary purpose of family life is to care for our children, to care for the members of the family. If you're a child, obviously, an adult child, you can care for your parents, but most of the time it's the parents caring for the kids and making sure that they're well taken care of and that they have what they need to find healing. And I'm going to repeat some of the sentiments in Rose's reflection here. She says that after divorce, we want to help you to learn to let go of many things. Slow down. Slow down. Think about that. Slowing down means, you go through a full day of work and you come home and now you're going to cook dinner for the family. And you might have to take your child out to some kind of soccer game or lesson, or to a friend's house, or to another responsibility or something. Slowing down means putting what's first. So I would say to you who are going through this divorce or separation or even an annulment, is to take that time out for you and your family. Slow down. That's an important thing so that you can find healing. Another thing she says is take rest. How can we be good for the people in our own lives when we're not getting the nutrition, the rest, the sleep, the recreation that we need to be whole human beings? You've been through a tough time and God doesn't want you to suffer, believe it or not, he doesn't want you to suffer. Suffering is part of who we are as Catholics who accept whatever comes our way in terms of God's will for our lives, because there is such a thing of sin that we all have to live through and go through. But what I think God's desire is always for us to take rest and find healing through him. Rose also says to pray more and talk things out. I think we should talk about that too. Mickey, for yourself, you're a person of faith. And when your parents went through the divorce, that whole topic of praying and talking things out, I don't know if you want to share anything on that, but was that something that helped you at all during times of your life where you felt you needed some more healing?
Honestly, and I think Rose really did touch on a very important point, is talking things out as well as praying. And those were some things I wish I relied on more at the time when everything was happening. Because I was actually the type of person that actually would, like, bottle it inside of me. And it got to the point where, like, I was performing well in school. I would lash out at people, even without stopping and thinking. And I also went through, divorce, and I even at one point contemplated about ending my life because I didn't want to go through it anymore. And one of the things that I really learned is, and of course, Rose really touched on it, is that without, talking it out more or praying more, it's going to pull you down. I kind of think of one of those, like something that's like really heavy, that's like attached to your ankle or something. It's not going to help. It's going to stop you from, sprinting across the field, or if, say, if it was going to, sink in depths of water, it's going to bring it with you, and you'll have a hard time trying to, reach the surface. But of course, but of course, simple physics, you're going to, well, of course, in scientific terms, human body, they have 2 minutes to breathe oxygen they have 2 minutes to get like above water to breathe oxygen. Otherwise they drown and eventually and potentially die. And I, honestly, like, that's something that's very important that I wish I knew sooner than later. Because honestly, they begin the part for you to heal from the tribulation that happens in your family.
Yeah, well said, because when you can turn around like you have and you can look back on your life, you were only 10 years old, you were a little kid, but you're recognizing the fact that when I say the words from Rose that had to do with praying more and also slowing down and talking things out, you can look back in that and say, you know what, I wished I did more of that. But it's also a great point of advice for those listening from someone like you who has the experience. And I will also say for myself, I mean, I was only a young kid. I was only 7 years old. And of course, I'm older, in my 50s. Life was slightly different back then in terms of society and culture. But the whole idea of talking things out back in the early 1970s, mid 1970s, was not something that was encouraged as much as it is now. So I think that's one benefit of our current society, is that there certainly are opportunities where people are encouraged to share. And there is such a thing as therapy, getting proper help with the right resources. So again, thank you, Mickey. Another thing that Rose says in that reflection is solving problems and finding solutions. When you're constantly doing, and you're not just being, you're not like letting yourself rest. And like I said, I go back to the topic of the podcast, is stepping back, stepping back from commitments to spend time with family. You're actually able, I think, to solve the problems and find solutions when you can step back and not be so busy all the time. Now, I know you're going to be busy either way, because if you're a single mom or a single dad and you're working and you also taking care of children, no matter what, you're going to be busy. But you don't need to make your life even more busy than it needs to be. So, Mickey, I don't know if you want to speak on being busy, because I think in our culture, that's something that people really overindulge in, isn't it?
And I think you really touched on an important point, is that you do have to keep yourself busy. And some of the things of course, you can't just dwell on, what happened. Like, well, for this, let's say for the spouse case, for example, and let's face it, it's not going to be in a walk in the park, say if I would say maybe 9 out of 10 times the father is out of the picture and the mom has to muster the strength and have to like kind of soldier on, so to speak, as a single, like, of course, to the point where she's going to be a single mom or something. But it's another thing too, that it's another thing too, that you just want to like think it's just like a death. You want to think of that death sentence. And you have two choices too. You can, rise above it, do something, that take your mind off this whole, your mind off what has happened, or you can let it consume you. For me, like as a kid, like I did baseball for a couple of years, but I got bored and I wasn't really interested in it. But I was never encouraged to pick up other like interesting activity, like say like karate or an instrument, or if I could, I wish I could do that. But sometimes like, doing things like hobbies or whatever is a really good therapy to help you take your mind off what is happening.
And that's a great point. I love that about hobbies, because hobbies are, I think, we think of the word busy. I think of work. I think of things that you, quote, have to do. But when you have a hobby, you can even find a hobby that you can do at home, right? You can find something you can do with your kids when you're going through divorce, separation, or annulment. Something you can do together that doesn't separate you. So I think that's really a beautiful thing that you just said, because, let's face it, I think divorced or not, separated or not, everybody's tempted to be too busy. And I think Mickey gives a good suggestion for all of us, that I think hobbies are a little different. Hobbies are something that take your mind off of work, aren't they? They're things that take your mind off of the to-do list. I just found an article. It's called "The Danger of Being Too Busy." Now, granted, this article isn't specifically for Catholics affected by divorce, but it does offer some really good suggestions, so we could talk more about the danger of being too busy. It says that when people are too busy, they tend to be irritable and get stressed out easily. They're in no condition to glorify God through their lives, and they're too busy to see the grace of God at work in the world around them. That is why it is important for us to slow down and take some time to grow closer to God. Instead of thinking of God for just a few minutes when we wake up or fall asleep, our prayers to God should be constant throughout the day. Slowing down will give us more time for reflection in our daily lives. We'll be able to see God in the small things that happen every day, to recognize God in the beautiful creation that surrounds us, and in the people that we encounter in our lives. We'll be able to spend more time throughout the day thinking about God, and as a result, we'll be more fully able to offer our entire day and everything that we do to glorify Him. Mickey, I don't know if you want to comment on that, because, divorced or not, separated or not, I think these are great words of advice. for us not to be too busy.
No, and honestly, I think it's a very good point too. One of the things that we have to really understand. I mean, I am for having hobbies and everything, and just do things such as whatever helps to keep your help provide put bread on the table and everything like that. But sometimes like I think some parents do seem to forget what their purpose in life is. For example, you look at the dads, and I remember I remember a story that I had a teacher once told me, that he was so busy with work that he kind of missed out on some important things from his kids. And I think the kids were like either young kids or they were kind of adolescents, back around that range, to the point where the spouse threatened divorce. And honestly, I think I honestly think that could have drawn the line, and it did for him. Thankfully, he was married until his wife passed away. I'm not sure how many years, but it proves the point that was just made, that one of the important things that we have to really understand is that it is good to be busy. It is good to have hobbies. But what I think that we also have to understand as well is that what we have to understand is that even like Pope Francis kind of talked about this, is that, he tells the parents to play with their children. Now, I'm not just saying like, play tea party or play board games or, play games with them or have a pickup game of baseball or throw a baseball back and forth in the backyard or football, whatever the case is. But I also think it could go a little deeper than that. But at time, what I think Pope Francis wanted to add to that is he wanted to encourage parents to not just play with the children, but to spend time with them. And I think that quality time makes a difference in the children's upbringing. Because suppose the father doesn't want to chip in, in the growth of their child, they're likely to become this, they're likely to become that. Whereas both parents are like, chipping in or stepping into, helping their kids, laying down the law and giving them a piece of advice, and every now and again, maybe dropping those dad jokes. I'm sure that sounds familiar to people listening to this, but the children need their parents, their mom and their dad. And with both of them in the picture, it would make a difference.
Beautifully said. First, let's start with the hobbies. And also playing with your children. That is just like, it's very profound when you think about it. Because I don't know about you, but I think that memories are built on time that we spend with our kids, with our families. And, let's face it, if you've been through divorce or separation, it's a hard thing to go through. It's a hard thing not to have the regular family unit intact. It's a hard thing not to have mom, dad, and kids together. So I think what Mickey said, when children can feel like they're still making memories, right? It's such an important thing. So when you step back, as our advice is on this podcast, when you step back and you decide, you know what, I want to take time to build memories with my kids, even if they don't have their dad with them, or even if, you're the dad listening and they don't have their mom, or, sometimes even grandmothers and grandfathers take over and help with raising the kids. So if you're listening to that, to this podcast, and that's you, you're building memories too for your grandchildren, positive memories. It means something for their healing. It means something for the direction of their lives when they can look back and say, I remember when my mom used to bake cookies with me. I remember when Dad used to go outside and we would throw the football back and forth in the backyard. I remember when my grandmother used to take me to the backyard and we would plant tomato plants and watch them grow over the summer. I mean, I'm just making up things in my head, but I mean, aren't these things that people remember, that they take with them? So I think that was very profound of what Mickey just said. I would also like to read, if I could, the rest or a little bit more of this article, The Danger of Being Too Busy. It says, in addition, the more time we spend in silence, the better we're able to hear God. God does not speak to us loudly over a microphone. Rather, he speaks to us in the quiet stillness of our hearts. Therefore, it's important that we know how to listen to him, to hear his voice. In today's busy, chaotic world, we can easily miss his voice if we do not slow down long enough to listen. Only in silence and prayer can we truly hear what God is saying in our hearts. It's important to our spiritual health that we do not become exceedingly busy to the point where we're never able to hear God speak in our lives. We need to make sure that we're able to spend an adequate amount of time in reflection and prayer. As Catholics and as people of faith and as Christians, that quiet time that we carve out to pray. If you're a mom and or a dad and you're divorced or separated, let's face it, I mean, you're going to be busy no matter what. But taking that time to reflect in silence, God loves you. Just because your marriage didn't work out, just because things aren't exactly the way you had planned, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 more years ago, you're still so loved by God, and God wishes for you to know how much you're loved and how much he wants you to be a part of our church, the Catholic faith. So let's go back then and talk about this whole idea of reflection and prayer. I know, Mickey, you're a person of prayer. You do like to go to Eucharistic adoration and pray. Can you talk to our audience, people affected by divorce, about how that can help them?
Well, it has been said from time and time again that the fathers are the leaders in the household. And even I remember a talk by Dr. Scott Hahn in which he pointed to the fact that if the father is leading the faith-based things, so such as prayer, 90% of the time the children will pick that up. If the father is going to mass, and let's say before they enter the pew during mass, he genuflects, the children will pick that up. So there's a powerful thing of having a father of faith in your family. And Annie, you just mentioned too about years down the road, or let's say the kids utilize their children, their fathers, I should rather say. Those are some of the things they should be talking about the times where he made time for us to help us practice some things like outside of the diamond, work on our skills a little bit, helped us with our homework, took us to the movies like on a Saturday afternoon or something, or drove us to sporting activities, took us to outing to the baseball game or something, things like that. And here, one of the things that fathers have to do too, and one of the perfect role models for them is Saint Joseph, because let's face it, I'm sure he spent, countless times with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. In fact, and you made a point about, adoration. Saint Joseph and Mary, they were frequent adorers of the Blessed Sacrament that they were sharing in the world. That was something Father Donald Calloway mentioned in his book about the consecration of Saint Joseph, which is like similar to the Saint Louis de Montfort 33 Days to Morning Glory consecration. And he meant in one of his points, in one of his commentaries, he mentioned that the frequent people that went to adoration every day in the history of mankind were Jesus and Mary. I'm sorry, Joseph and Mary, I should rather say. Because you think about it, every time they were running away from imminent terror, or if they were going from place to place, they were adoring Jesus for most of the time. And here, we need to learn that example of how we can adore Jesus every time and pray to him through the Father. Because it is through the Father's love that we know who Jesus is. It is through the Father example that we are willing to live out our faith. Because if you are with fathers, I say this to the men, you are called to be the spiritual leaders, whether it's a father, as a priest, a deacon, a brother, or I like to throw this in there, bishop. You are called to be the spiritual leader. You are called to lead people to prayer. Most importantly, you are called to lead them to Christ.
So wonderful. Thank you for sharing on that, because we need to address not just women on this podcast, right? We need to address men, fathers, grandfathers, priests, bishops, deacons. You know, I hate to say it, but I do think, Mickey, that sometimes in our culture, for men that don't want to step up to the challenge of parenting, it gets left to the women and the grandmothers and the aunts and the sisters, doesn't it? All of that stuff gets left for them to have to worry about the kids and worry about their whereabouts, their salvation, their schooling, their every aspect of what it means to be a parent, okay? And so you're right. I do think that we all need to, male and female, we need to step up to the challenge of faith. We need to step up to the challenge of believing and following what we're taught, not just for the sake of ourselves, but for the sake of other people and for the sake of God most of all. And this article that I'm continuing to read, the danger of being too busy, from the Catholic News Agency, it says, I see the problem of excessive busyness as a major problem among teenagers as well as adults. Many young people are involved in schools, sports, clubs, and other activities. They're often busy from the moment they wake up until the moment they go to sleep. This way of life can become dangerous for teenagers, as it can for anyone. A schedule that is overly busy is not healthy physically or spiritually. We need to remember to allow ourselves enough time to see the goodness of God in our lives. The Lord tells us to be still and know that I'm God. That's from Psalms 46:11. And this is important advice for us to follow as we strive to live as Christians. Let's unpack this for people who are divorced, separated, or annulled. I'm going to reread another one of these sentences here. It says that the way of life can become dangerous for teenagers as it can for anyone. You know, some people think teenagers and college kids are the only people that are really busy. But you know what? We can be busy from early life all the way through, and we can become too busy. And when you're too busy to pray, when you're too busy to spend time with your family, you need to step back, which is the topic of this podcast. Mickey, has there ever been a time in your life where you had to step back, where you felt like God was able to work in your life in greater ways?
I think there were times that I did have to take a step back for sure. And I would say there were times like I didn't really get along with my mom very well. And it's common, you know, with the mother-son thing, because sons tend to get along better with their dads. And there was a period that it was like that. And my mom was like questioning, like, why wasn't I including her in the high school things, like the high school open houses and things like that, to the point where like not only was I angry at her, but I was like she was mad at me. She was disappointed. And I got to the point where I really take a step back, and I'll be honest, like I didn't really get close to her again until maybe like my college years. And there were times, sure, like her and I would have our differences and everything, but that's beside the point. But yeah, I just think the most important thing was allow God to heal whatever division, like whatever problems that her and I, like, we both had. And he did.
Thank you for sharing on that. That's somewhat vulnerable. And I think it's whenever we're a little bit vulnerable about our experiences, we're helping people. So you're helping somebody, Mickey, by listening to this. You helped me too, because I think we can all look at times in our lives when we stepped back and maybe a relationship wasn't perfect, like you mentioned your mom, but I think God has really worked through that in great ways. For me, now, all of you listeners know, because we've said it on different podcasts and things like that, that I'm not divorced, not separated, but I'm the child of divorce. But I'm going to reflect on a time that I had to step back from a lot of things, because it was a time that I went through a health problem. And that was when my second daughter was born, and I was diagnosed with a very rare heart condition, which praise God that I'm healed from. But what I learned about stepping back during that time was that it allowed me not only to be healed physically, right? Because I had to step back to get a lot of rest so that I could be able to take care of my kids, so that I could follow doctor's orders, and so that I could get stronger again. I think that's what stepping back does. Stepping back helps us to be healed so that we can be stronger later on. And so, for you listening, this advice that we're giving you on this podcast, specifically for those affected by divorce, is so that you can be stronger, so that you can walk and move ahead after this crisis and this challenge and this adversity that you've gone through, that you can step away and realize that God was able to get you through it stronger than you were before. Now, I want to address the different facets of divorce and separation, because we get people who call us quite frequently that have different situations. The vast majority of clients and people that reach out to us are people who didn't really wish for this to happen. They didn't really wish for their marriages to end. They did have a lot of regrets about the whole situation and why it happened as it did. I also do think there's a percentage of people, not always our clients, but people who wanted the divorce for whatever reason. Maybe it was an abusive relationship. Maybe things have been sour for years. Maybe things were going on that your husband or your wife was doing that you didn't know about, but found out later on, and then it just never really repaired. But what I'm trying to say is, I don't think anybody gets married with the idea in their head and says, I think I want to get divorced in a couple years, or 5 years, or 10 years, or even, sadly, even 20 or 30 years. So for you that are listening, I want to just say that that's why we're here for you. This foundation was formed, and we're all about families in crisis, for marriage enrichment, and also for outreach to divorced and separated Catholics. And that's why we exist, is to help you to bring healing to your life. And just to accept the fact sometimes that sin does exist in our world, and in a very sad way we say that, but thankfully we have our Savior, Jesus Christ, who, no matter what that sin is that he offers forgiveness through the church, through the sacramental life, through things like the sacrament of confession, and being able to receive his body and blood in the Eucharist. So that's what we're all about. We're about helping you to feel the open arms of the Catholic Church, quite frankly. Mickey, I know that you talked about that, your mom's experience with feeling the open arms of the church. I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit for our listeners, to let them know how much we're there for them and how much the Catholic Church is there for Catholics affected by divorce.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I guess one of the important things is that I say one of the important things that children must understand is that your parents will love you no matter what. You're a gift to many, and taking the easy way out is going to create some problems. Whether you want to embrace, whether you develop a drinking problem, smoke cigarettes or anything, they won't help you cope with what happened between you and your parents. And honestly, you need to let God in, because he can heal those deep wounds that were brought about from that divorce. You need to run to Jesus, run to his arms. You need to drop to your knees and ask for healing and forgiveness. And while you're at it, pray for your parents, because they do need it.
Yeah, that's right. I think you said that very well. Your parents need it if you're the adult child of divorce. And you need it if you're the divorced person. You need that healing. Mickey, I think we really unpacked a lot of wisdom during this podcast. I thought maybe what we can end was, I'd like to read some quotes from the Holy Father. You know, he said a lot about mercy, and I do think that for people affected by divorce and separation, it really is all about God's mercy, because, you know, we love you as a church. You know, we are the church, aren't we? And the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith, where the primary mission is families in crisis. You know, we're here for you. We love you. We care about you. And make sure that you make that free pastoral consultation with a Mercedarian friar. You know, you can have as many consultations as you need to talk about your issues, to find healing, the healing through the Catholic Church. You know, the fourth charism of the Mercedarian religious order is the willingness to give their lives for those in danger of losing their faith. You know, that's what we're all about. That's what Mickey and I are all about. And that's what all of our board members and all the people that we help, why we do what we do, is because we care so much about you and your healing. The Pope Francis says that mercy is a force that reawakens us to new life and instills in us the courage to look to the future with hope. I'm going to read a few from him. And I love this one. He says, let the church always be a place of mercy and hope, where everyone is welcome, loved, and forgiven. That is so true, not only for those affected by divorce, but for every single one of us. You know, we all need God's love. We all need that mercy to keep going, and to know that we are loved by God. And I had one more that I wanted to read. He says, to change the world, we must be good to those who cannot repay us. Now, remember that in terms of your family too, because you might be the mom of a few kids and they can't repay you for all you're doing, right? They can't repay you for all the times that you drove them to school, took them to practice, dropped them off at the store or their friend's house, took the time with their homework, made a dinner for them, make the bed, clean the house. You know, they can't repay you for all that you're doing, but God sees what you're doing. And, you know, when you take the time, as our podcast theme for this evening was stepping back from too many commitments to be with family, you're doing God's work, really, aren't you? We're doing God's work. Mickey, did you have any final words before we end this podcast?
I would say the most important thing is, parents, get involved in your kids' lives. Make sure that you are the first teachers. It's not Mrs. Smith that teaches science, or Mr. Mr. Jordan that teaches, physical education, whatever the case is, you were the first teachers. And the reason I say that is because you have to teach your children the faith. You have to teach them what's right and wrong. You have to teach them manners, of course. When to say please, thank you, excuse me, when to make way for a lady that wants to go across from you, or helping the elderly, with their groceries, whatever the case is. Show them how to be not just Christ-centered witnesses, but also faithful witnesses and law-abiding citizens. That's my one advice. The second advice is for children. When the going gets rough, hang tough and cling to your faith. Run to Jesus because he is waiting for you. I always think of the song by Matt Meyer, Lord, I Need You. And I see that song as a prayer. And if you feel like you're being hurt, you're being abandoned, I want you to listen to that song. Put it on blast. And I guarantee you, it will help you. My final point is for families who are going through the crisis of a potential divorce. Reevaluate your faith. Have you allowed God in your life? Have you stressed the importance of your family first and your job last? Take a good look at yourselves. And children, and for those who are going through divorce, whether it's as a spouse or as a child, connect with someone who can help you get through your darkest period of your life.
Beautiful, wonderful words of advice. And I love that last one that you said, connect with someone. Just a reminder that maybe, just maybe, one of those someones could be us, the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, as we represent a beautiful religious order, the Mercedarians, at orderofmercy.org. If you or someone you know is interested in vocations too, please do check that out. But that's what we're all about. We're all about giving our lives for those in danger of losing their faith. It's all about faith. Mickey, they were beautiful words of advice. I want to thank all of you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at Philly Nonnatus. We really appreciate that too. So just click on that. Just look up Philly Nonnatus on YouTube. Now, this is podcast number 3 for 10 steps for healing for divorced. Number 4 is next month, and that one will be to seeking God's help through prayer and sacrifice. So join us then next month. Mickey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ann, for having me.
God bless everyone. We'll see you next month with the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. This is Ann DeSantis. We'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Did you enjoy this podcast? Listen to other podcasts from Patchwork Heart Ministry by following Patchwork Heart Radio wherever you listen to podcasts.